Welcome to Fully Exposed, a podcast that explores the taboo and unconventional in an attempt to educate your ass. I'm your host, Jessica Beuker. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome to the show. I've got our guest, Iva Celebic, here, and we're ready to chat about today's topic, which is capitalism and nudity. These are two topics that are already very interesting on their own, but we're going to go ahead and make life a little more interesting by combining them. To start, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, Iva?
So I am a recent journalism graduate.
Congratulations.
Yes. I live in Toronto with a couple ex news girls as well. And I do a lot of reading and writing. I write a lot of nonfiction. And yeah, I try and get out of the city as much as I can.
Awesome. So we're going to take it back because before we can tackle a big topic like nudity or capitalism, we kind of need to understand where our ideas about these two things come from. So I'm curious to know what your personal experiences were like in regards to body image and nudity as you were growing up.
So the topic of body image was always brought up in my home, in the sense where there's always commentary on what I'm wearing, how I look for something. In a European household, that's kind of a standard. So a lot of, I would say, negative and positive commentary constantly on your image. Mm-hmm. But in terms of nudity, it was a completely fluid experience where if everyone's not in their underwear all of the time, something is up in the house. So it's a dichotomy sort of like an intensity in commentary where someone's constantly saying something, but a total fluidity. And when someone gets out of the shower and they're naked and they need cream on a certain part of their back, it's totally normal for them to run out and say, hey, can you get this for me? Or if I'm straightening my hair and my dad really needs to pee before work, he's going to run in and pee, and I'm still going to keep straightening my hair. So there isn't a lot of separation in terms of nudity, but there's definitely still some sort of rigidness in body image.
Yeah. That's interesting. So nudity was very much like a free and open thing growing up in your household then.
Mm-hmm, because everybody's got a body. Everyone's got 2 arms and 2 legs and boobs or a butt, and it's all very utilitarian. So it's almost not getting naked in an opportunity where you could is almost insulting. Because they would think, oh, what, you think I've never seen that before? You know? Why are you so stressed out about it? And you'd be like, okay. So many times you're almost like coerced into getting naked. Say if we're going to the beach and there's no change room in sight, I would be stressing out like, oh, I need to get down to like some restaurant or something to change into my bathing suit. Or my mom would be like, oh, come on, like just change right here quickly behind this tree. No one's looking, who cares? And you're like, oh God. But the more and more you do that, you realize no one's really looking at you and nobody really cares. So
it's very interesting because I feel like that's completely different than how most people grow up. Most people I know anyway. Did you grow up in Canada?
I grew up in Canada, but I spent 4 months every year or every other year in Croatia. And that started to shorten as we got older and had our own responsibilities. But I spent a lot of time on the beach. And I spent a lot of time around other Croatian kids.
Right. And where are your parents from? Like, where were they born?
So they are from Sarajevo, which is a part of Bosnia, which used to be a part of former Yugoslavia, which used to be communist under Tito. So they were there until they were 31 or 32. So the most of their life, they've grown up under I would say like communist ideals or a secular way of living where, you know, Christianity or Catholicism isn't embedded in everything around you.
Right. So they're kind of, I guess, growing up has influenced the way that they've raised you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So coming to a different country, I think at an age where they've already made up their mind about how they view the world, that's all their ideas sort of carried on into Canada. And it was my job and my sister's job to sort of integrate those two ideas. And it comes down to even like how you do math or something. They do math differently over there than we do it here, you know?
Right.
So it was a lot of that growing up sort of putting the two ideas together, weighing them and seeing what works for you.
Yeah, because you get a lot of, I mean, it's your parents, of course, are a big influence on you when you're growing up, but you also get so many other outside influences, like your education and the friends that you make and things like that. So not now being in Canada, where it's obviously very different from the culture that your parents grew up in. You've got on the one side, you know, the way that your parents are raising you, and then on the other side, you know, the things that your friends are doing and what you're being taught in school. Did you find that those two like butt heads at all?
Entirely, yeah. They always butt heads, and I think only as I got older did I realize how fortunate I am for it to have butt heads, because I feel like instead of just seeing one stream all of the time and then turning into an adult and then starting to learn that there's all these alternative ways to exist, I feel like I was seeing both of them all of the time at a younger age, and also speaking another language. So Croatian or Serbo-Croatian is my first language. And you also have a different personality and a different style of humor in another language. So there's always a constant dichotomy within me. And I feel extremely grateful for it now that I'm older. But I think in the time it was really confusing, because I felt like I didn't know how to mush those two things together, because their families definitely weren't in their underwear, you know? And I've always, like, my roommates and stuff always joke around to me saying, like, oh, you guys are so sexual, or you guys are always so touchy. And it's like, no, it's just a lot of people living in small quarters who need to shower and need to use the washroom, and it's so normal to me that I never even thought about it.
Wow. Can you remember the first time that you ever felt self-conscious about your body?
Probably in like a gym class change room.
So were you still young, or like a teenager?
I was still young, yeah. It would have been in middle school, so like grade 7 or 8. I don't know how old that is, but yeah, I just really remember being in a change room and not knowing if I should just change or if I should wait for a washroom in the change room to change. And no girls really did do that, or like the girl with the big boobs felt cool changing, but the girl with like the awkward body didn't. So it was really like this uncomfortable experience. And I definitely remember wondering, like, why the hell everyone didn't just change in the change room, because that's what you do. And I think if we all just changed in the change room, you know, the way women act towards each other at a later age would be so much more civil or something.
So you definitely felt those like outside influences kind of creeping in, because it was so different than what you did at your house.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess to further that, how have your experiences growing up in a Yugoslavian home and surrounded by European culture differed in other ways from your experiences growing up in Canada? Like, what are maybe some other things besides just body image and nudity that they've differed?
I guess in general, the conversation is a huge difference. The sort of like politeness that you get in a Canadian home, of when you go to their house for dinner, you know, you're eating like a frozen meal for one, and you're all sitting around talking about like what Susie did at school today, and that's kind of the depth of the conversation. Whereas in a European household, it's like this entire home cooked meal that's taken them 2 hours to cook. Everyone's maybe got a little bit of alcohol of some kind. That's like very casual. And, you know, by the end of it, everyone's arguing about something in the news or something that happened 30 years ago. You know, so I think they engage with you in a different way that's a lot more realistic, or a lot more acknowledging of a different style of reality. Whereas I feel like in Canadian or North American households, they like to skim the surface a lot. They don't really want to ask you how you're doing. They don't really want to know if you're not doing well. But yeah, a lot of But in another way too, European families are really in your business sometimes, or there are a lot of tough love. My parents have never told me I did anything good in my life. They never said good job. It was always like, great, what's next? Great, what's next? And I think growing up, I felt like, oh, well, Susie and Sam got a good job. I wish I got a good job too. And it kind of stunk. But as I got older, I realized that if they told me I did a good job, then I would stop trying to do a good job. And it's really, the tough love thing is hard when you're growing up and you're trying to understand. But once you understand all the values they're trying to implement in you in like a rougher way, it's very different than how we do it over here.
I think a lot of you said it when you said the kind of skimming the surface of things. You see that a lot in conversations, not even amongst your own family members, but friends, coworkers, everything like that. It's like people either maybe don't want to know because they don't want to have to, I guess, ask the follow-ups or get invested in what's next, but also are scared that an answer that they don't want to hear is coming, or that maybe makes them feel uncomfortable, or that differs from their own opinions or ideas.
And to a degree,
beliefs.
too, we're not allowed to do that. If somebody at my work says, hey, how you doing today? And I say, oh, I'm pretty bummed out. My coworkers don't want to hear that. My boss doesn't want to hear that. But I'm bummed out, Yeah. And I think that's where the capitalism versus anti-capitalist systems like socialism or communism sort of differ. Is if you don't like your job, you can say you don't like your job. You still have to do it, but it's okay in your workplace to say, I don't really like this, or I'm not really feeling good today. Whereas here, you constantly have to keep up this front of everything is good and all these micro conversations in your life, and all those amalgamate. So at the end of the day, when you go home, you don't know how to talk about yourself. You don't know how to answer how you are because you're constantly not answering it.
Wow. That's pretty powerful. I've never heard it in those words before. Can you, before we jump right into capitalism and all of that fun stuff, can you, for our maybe not so political readers, explain a little bit about the differences in your eyes between capitalism and communism? So you've had experiences on both sides. Mm-hmm. Not everyone can say that, right? I was born into a capitalist society. I've grown up in a capitalist society. That's all I know. I have no idea how a communist society functions. Besides from my own research and what have you, but to actually experience it, which is so much more honest and is completely different than what you can possibly read or hear about. So can you just kind of, I guess, talk a little bit about both of those experiences?
So I think the first thing that they both share is that they're both theoretical political systems, and they don't always work out like they do on paper, which is good to remember, Not entirely. I know communism can fail, and I know capitalism can fail. But yeah, capitalism is a system that's economically driven. So it's about money, and it's about your value in terms of money. So the things that are central to it all revolve around the economy, which takes a lot of humanism out of the system. Whereas communism is, yes, a little bit more militaristic, but it is more about participation. So it's enough for you to show up and contribute. Whereas in capitalism, it's your ethic that's judged. It's how you did your job, not that you did it. And so that's, I think, the defining difference, in the sense that you're constantly scrutinized in capitalism. You are constantly working for self-betterment. You're trying to be better. There's a lot of competition. You're trying to be better than everybody else. There's a lot of tension. Your coworkers are not your friends. They're your coworkers. But your job is supposed to be a career that's your identity, where you spend the most time. So you're spending a lot of time in a career where the people that are around you are not your friends, in order to make enough money, in order to do great things with people who aren't your friends. So it's what it's centralized around, I think, hurts a lot of us emotionally. It grants us a lot of money and a lot of opportunities to do things or have access to resources, but I think it takes a lot away from us cerebrally. And whereas communism sort of leaves you alone mentally a bit more. They sort of acknowledge the void, if you will. They acknowledge that work isn't fun. They acknowledge that, we're just here to make money in order so we can get to the next day. It's a lot more about maintenance as opposed to efficiency and speed and getting the greatest, best thing. It's about function. It's about being utilitarian, just having the things we need. So, yeah, the attention is less on your job and more about after your job, when you go home to your family, the food you're eating, the relationships you have with your family and your friends. And so, although you have access to maybe less things or physical or tangible rules are more strict, you have a lot more cerebral freedom, which is why I think a lot of people think communism is a negative thing, because when you see it physically, you think, wow, all these people are only watching Cuban television as opposed to having access to all channels, let's say. But, a Cuban person can show up to work and say, I really hate today. And that there's a democracy in a cerebral way. Right.
And kind of I would imagine, again, I have no experiences living in a communist society, but such a different view in terms of your mental health and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
In North America, we it's getting a little bit better now, but for so long it was as long as you have your physical health in order to keep working and keep making money and
running yourself into the ground.
Yeah, and keep essentially running yourself into the ground, that's fine, right? As long as you didn't have any physical symptoms on the outside, you weren't having heart attacks, you were fine. Mm-hmm. And that was good, and you could keep being kind of a cog in the machine. And now we've reached this point where
it's the highest rate of mental
ever, and
it's 50% in America,
which is so crazy. And
mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously that's also related to a rise in technology and just constantly now always being plugged in. Before it was okay, maybe you did your job between 9 to 5, and now people do their jobs all the time because they have their work email on their phone and what have you. How would you describe then in those terms the difference of your own mindset? Do you still go back to Europe and spend time in the places where you grew up?
Yeah I still do that, and I do try to limit any technological use. I don't watch very much television. I don't watch any television shows. And I try not to use my cell phone at all. Obviously, I need it, but on my social media sites, let's say, I only will follow people who I interact with or who I know that are alive and doing things, Mm-hmm. So just I'm constantly trying to strengthen my relationships, I think, and strengthen stranger relationships. So I like the cafe that I work at, I like to engage with people in a way that makes them uncomfortable sometimes, just to get them to say something, or when I remember something they said, they find it very surprising, and they'll say oh, I'm so surprised you remember that. And I would just hit them on the head kind of and say, well, I've been here for 4 years, of course I'm going to remember that. Kind of dumbfounding people in a sense where you can trust other people. You can trust them. You just have to engage with them more. And I think that's sort of different.
Have you brought some of those communist values with you here? Do you try to integrate them into the society? If your boss was to ask you if you were how you were, do you stick more to the, I'm really bummed out, I'm having a shit day, mm-hmm. or have you kind of adopted the status quo a little bit?
I think my strongest carry on is the use of no. In in Canada, I find if you say yes all of the time, you are the best employee ever, because you always rise to the occasion. If you're being manipulated, if the work makes you uncomfortable, if the work is too much, if you're not being paid for it, yep, yep, yep. And everyone will say, oh, like so-and-so is such a great employee because they never say no. And so I love to say no in the setting where it's applicable, you know, reminding people that you can't just use my work for nothing or something, because I think that's sort of the difference, like standing up for yourself, and being liberal in the way you speak with people.
It's a little hard. As you're saying it, I realize I'm definitely very much a yes person, and it's a little bit detrimental to your health after a while. To just, there comes a point where you're like exhausted, and you're like, why am I so exhausted? Oh yeah, because I don't take a break from trying to please everybody.
Yeah.
Moving on, or moving back, I guess, to this bridge of capitalism and nudity. Now I want to bring the two together. Mm-hmm. How, if you could describe to our listeners what you see as the correlation between capitalism and nudity, and how those two relate.
Mm-hmm. So I would have to sort of bring the article in around, because I feel like I had an epiphany moment last summer. So a lot of beaches in Croatia are nude, and a lot of small islands are nude that you can go to. And a lot of Norwegians and Danish people love going to Croatia because there's such good nudity laws there, and it's such a nice experience. And so I was constantly engaging in nudity, and then I had returned to Toronto and went to a nude beach, and I felt so uncomfortable. And I had this moment where I thought, if I've constantly been doing this and I'm super confident about it, why do I feel so uncomfortable doing this if nudity is nudity? And you realize that everybody that's around you validates not only your safety, but your experience. So if the people who are looking at you don't make you feel comfortable, then even if you are super confident, you're not going to feel very cool about it. And so it was this big moment where I sort of realized that, you know, we are creatures of our environment, and something is off in this space. And all the tendencies of everybody there was just super cathartic. It was really cool to be naked. It was really badass to be naked, and it was like a show to be able to do it. And everybody had this poise and this pride about it. And there wasn't very many women, and everybody had a really sexy, like objectively sexy body, and it just made me feel really uncomfortable. And in Croatia, the people, like, it's all kinds of ages, for one, from like the 60-year-old woman to the 3-year-old, men, women, fat, skinny, you know, post-pregnancy, during pregnancy, like, there's just such a mashup that nobody really cares if I'm naked, you know? No one's looking at anybody. And when nothing is anything, nothing stands out, sort of. Whereas when you're in this, like, beach where everybody looks so similar, it's a weird feeling. It doesn't feel as naturalistic or in tune with nature. You don't feel like it's an experience. You just feel like everyone's just trying to get naked to feel liberated. And why? Because they don't feel liberated in their everyday life. So they think they need to do something extravagant to feel that. And then that was sort of the first layer. And then the second layer was thinking about, you know, the way we interact with each other to the media, and like what we are constantly seeing at Yonge and Dundas Square all the time, and on our phones all the time. And there's just so many different spaces where capitalism creeps in, mm-hmm. and their ideas creep in, and it's just an absolute naivety to think that these ideas don't infringe on your brain, even if they don't think about it. You know, me, who like constantly tries to combat it, it's still gonna affect me because this is where I live. So yeah,
it's that commodification, I guess, of the body. And you need to feel like you have something that's really, really great to sell. And if you don't, I mean, we're told what's sold so we can see it. And it's a very, very, very like tiny, tiny, narrow version of what a body actually looks like. And if we are constantly told, hey, this is what sells, and we don't look like that, then we go, okay, well, I don't have anything to sell. So I can't possibly, I can't go to a nude beach and possibly show my body because it's not.
And then once you pair that up with it not only being this image that you see, but the only image that you've ever seen. So even when I came in contact in that, I'd already seen boobs down to your knees for like 10 years. So when I see these like perky small boobs, I didn't think very much of it. I just thought, oh, that's a type of boob,
Yeah.
If that's the only like image you've seen your whole life growing up, then not only are all the ideas behind it going to affect you, but it's also going to tie in to it's the first thing you've ever seen, which is where like obsession comes in and fetishing and craving. And when you privatize something and lock it up, once you finally see it, it's like this weird thing.
Yeah. I want to talk about that again. This conversation's kind of all about dualities, but that interesting duality. So like we're very conservative in a lot of ways. Again, the locker room changing thing, go waiting for a bathroom stall because you can't possibly just simply change in front of other women. Or we tell our, young children, look away, don't ever look at somebody else's body. Shaming women who are breastfeeding, which is a source of life. And then on the flip side of that, you have, let's use boobs to sell hamburgers and cars, and it works. So how do you feel like that juxtaposition kind of came to be? Because it's so drastic and distinct. These are two things that sit on completely opposing lines. And I mean, is it the same juxtaposition? I'm assuming it's not, you don't have that juxtaposition in a communist society. Or is there still like hints of it?
I think communism is a lot more realistic. It's a lot more acknowledging a woman must feed a baby, and every woman may have a baby. It's just so banal and so obvious that a woman needs to feed a baby, Right. So but in Canada, it's all about privacy. So immediately women are like, oh God, why is she doing that in here? She should be going to do that in private. And it's this constant idea of privacy. What would you need privacy for? Like, you're only here for so long. You might as well like share all these things with other people. The more you don't expose people to things. If an entire room was breastfeeding and somebody walked in, nobody could say anything, It's that we're taught to go into our corner, and so we're all doing it. And I don't know, I talk about it all the time with my mom because she's obviously aging, and she used to work in the bathing suit department in Hudson's Bay, and women would always come up to her and say, I'm looking for a bathing suit, blah, 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 and she would find them like a really nice two-piece because they're like 30 and gorgeous, and they would always say, oh, no, I just had a baby, I need to put on a one-piece, I can't go out looking like this. And my mom would get so offended for them and say like, you're 30 years old, you look amazing. It's so normal to have a different style of body. And a lot of women are scared to embrace that. And it's sad because you're still young. And I think constantly hiding these things, you're just pushing it to be in a more hidden space all of the time.
You've already kind of answered this. My question was how do cultures that reject capitalism view nudity in the human body? And from what you said, I'm assuming that it's seen more as like, it's kind of just like a vessel that houses your organs in your blood, and it does its thing and it keeps you alive.
I think it's a more naturalist approach because you're much closer. You're living in closer quarters with each other, I think. You're interacting with family a lot more. European families are much closer than the North American families. And I think the closeness is what makes you say, oh, I don't care if you're naked, or it's not really a big deal over time. It's just really owning up to what it means to exist and what it means to have a body, and getting off your phone, getting off the internet, getting off the television, and really interacting with what you look like. And yeah, I don't know, it's difficult to answer that question because sometimes I think it's so obvious. Like, I think we just constantly think that other people are constantly caring about what we look like. And that's where shame comes in. Because you can have a bad, I'm not 100% confident with my body, but I never shame myself for my body. And I think that's the difference. But yeah, in Toronto, when you walk down the street, you're never looked in the eye. You're always looked either from your head to your toe, or your toes up to your head. It's never just we're looking at each other walking down the street. And like in Croatia, no one looks you up and down. When you're walking down the nude beach, no one looks you up and down. No one cares unless they're talking to you. No, everyone's already in their own life. Everyone's got like their own narrative. They're not so concerned with what everybody else is doing, and that's where the money starts to tie in, and the competition and the obsession, and what's he doing and what's she doing, what's she wearing. You know, that's where shame enters. Relativity creates shame, you know?
Yeah. Ties in really nicely to what I want to talk about next. In the article, I guess I should tell the audience what this article is. You've referenced the article now. So Iva had written an article for Plaid Zebra magazine about capitalism and nudity. It's an article that I loved reading, and there were just so many great pieces that have really resonated with me and stuck with me, even though she wrote it probably like well over a year ago now. Was it a year ago?
A year ago.
A year ago. About that.
Yeah.
Anyway, one of the quotes from the piece that you wrote was as follows: Canada's conservative ideas of the body, disguised as liberalism, are entrapping. When we cage the body with ideals and standards, fetishizing, craving, and sexual violence is born. I find that very interesting because, again, it pulls into this idea of sexual violence, right? Sexual assault is, especially today, with huge movements such as the Me Too movement and, you know, Time's Up and all of these different kind of movement. It seems like you can't turn on the news or read anything without hearing about it. It's so prevalent, and I don't know if it's any more prevalent today than it, you know, was 10 or 20 years ago. Just maybe now it's easier to get access to because of all the news outlets. But I'm curious to know if you believe that is like a direct correlation to how capitalist societies view the body.
So I think it's a lot like alcohol, for example. Everybody in Europe drinks at a very young age, and it's very crazy to a Canadian or American. But there's a lot less alcoholism. When you're allowed to drink, it's not a rebellious act to drink once you can drink.
Right.
America has the highest rate of alcoholism. That's not to say Europe doesn't have it, but it's bad in America.
Yeah.
And you know, they ban alcohol until you're 21. So it's like you're waiting so long till you can get your hands on something, and then it just implodes on you. And there's no gradual learning of how to engage with a substance, how to engage with nudity, there's no slow progression into it. And so I think sort of the choppiness of it is what creates predators or pedophiles, or there's a million other variables of what makes people want to do that. But I think when you don't see something and then you see something, it's too much. It's too much for a brain. Even with mothers who are very nervous about their children swearing or something, you know, they're going to swear eventually. So you might as well teach them places you can swear and places you can't swear or something, you know. There needs to be a gradual sort of education. And I think we like in North America, we do a lot of finger pointing, like, no, you can't do this, no, you can't touch this, yes, you can do this. Mummy says no. Mummy says don't cross the street like that, Whereas the other side is a lot more, push her in a pool and see if she can swim. And she'll know what it's like to drown or something. It's a lot more immersive. My mom never had a babysitter when I was growing up. If she needed to go to the grocery store, she said, Mummy's going to go to the grocery store and I'll be back in 25 minutes. And she trusted me as like a 5-year-old to stay home by myself for those 30 minutes, which is something a lot of like moms that I interact with every day would never do. But I think the point is giving a person more responsibility teaches them responsibility.
Right.
Taking away responsibility, when they earn it, when they get it, they don't know what to do with it. And that's the difference in communism and in capitalism, I think. In capitalism, they're constantly telling you what to do and how to do it. And in communism, they're saying, hey, this needs to get done, by this and then. Get it done the way that you know how. So I think that creates creative people who are driven to think creatively or imaginatively. And in capitalism, you're just constantly listening to somebody tell you how to do everything all of the time. Going off tangent now. But I think without a slow progression, it creates a lot of fetishing and a lot of craving and a lot of like internet searching and looking at things. And whereas like if you walk down a beach and you see a million women topless and men, some nude men, you're not going to go home and then think about it. There's other things that you can do now. So
I guess it's that we're so used to seeing the body only in sexual ways because we only ever show it in like super hypersexualized advertisements or movies and television shows. It's very rare that you turn on the TV and you see just like a woman bathing, right? It's a sex scene. Usually the nudity serves that purpose. So I guess if you're constantly, that's what you're exposed to, then you constantly, that's all you know. You constantly think of bodies as being sexual. So when you do see, a woman breastfeeding, your instant thought is, oh, well, that's a sexual thing and it's on the bus and I shouldn't be looking at that. So she should have to put her baby's food away.
Yeah. And then on top of that, in North American television, I don't know if this is still true, but you couldn't see like a sexual scene till after 10 on television. So it's you're also reinforcing that the nudity is for nighttime.
Right. It's
even
for
if
adults.
It's not sexual, it's for adults, it's for nighttime. Whereas French films, which are a lot more naked, you get introduced to this sort of like fluidity that's so, it's not naughty,
Yeah. It's even, naughty one thing, it's even gone the extra mile to be like completely forbidden, right? Like you have people getting arrested for being like topless in the street in places in Canada, which of all the legal issues to be tackling, that really doesn't seem like it should be at the top of the list. But I think just again going back to that, this is something that's forbidden. This is something that's for grown-ups for nighttime.
And what's I think an interesting point is when we had first immigrated to Canada, we lived in Montreal or in Quebec, and it was a very, very hot day, and my mom took my sister to the pool. My sister was 4 years old or 3 years old, and my mom didn't have a swimsuit for Leia because why the hell would she put a synthetic Walmart bathing suit on a child to sweat in with chlorine on it? Like, my mom thinks it's just the most like gross thing for a small child who has like a new immune system. So she took her to the pool on this hot day, and one of the security guards came up to her and said, you can't have your child swimming here without a bathing suit on. And Leia is like the size of a raisin and has like no body hair.
She's a child.
She's a child. And my mom just started dying of laughter, and she said, I've never even bought my child a bathing suit. Like, I don't even understand what you're saying to me. And so it's like sexualizing a child, or assuming that there's a predator in the pool, or assuming there's a predator around you. It's just it's just so bizarre to her to think that someone wants to look at my child, or that my child isn't safe bare butt as a little kid.
Yeah.
And I always found that story very triggering.
Instead of kind of changing our society's ideals, instead we've kind of put all of that onus on women especially, but to just protect yourself at all costs, right? Again, making that assumption that there could be someone, a pedophile at the pool. It's not let's live in a society kind of where we teach people.
It's fear-mongering.
It's saying, okay, no, you should change your life.
Don't trust your neighbors. Put on a wetsuit when you go to the pool. That's what it's saying.
Do you believe that we can truly live in a capitalist society that is also body liberating? Or do you see the two as mutually exclusive? Is there like some happy
I think there's
medium?
Definitely a medium that we can get into.
Do you have any ideas of how we're going to get there?
I think it starts with you and everybody around
Me
us.
specifically?
You specifically. Get naked on this podcast. No one can see you. No, it starts with community, I think. You can't make the billboard go away. You're not going to make the advertisement stop. They're just going to get worse. So I think tuning that out of your brain, stopping thinking about it, and getting off your phone more, getting off television more, and starting to be more risky in your actions. So when you're getting ready to go somewhere with a friend in her room, you feel like you want to just quickly change into these pants, but you're nervous, so you run to the washer. Maybe next time don't do that. Mm-hmm. And then don't do that again. And then don't do that again. And then slowly your friend's naked too. Never infringe on someone's space, but I think in areas where you can encourage or act freely, I think that you should take that risk and do it, because other people will love it and other people will want to do it. And compliments too. I think how many times do people think like, oh, that woman's got such a great sweater on, but they don't say it. Or, we don't talk to each other enough physically. And I think that's why things like the self-love movement really bother me, because they're so individualistic and self-oriented, and showing self-love, showing that I love myself, and that's what capitalism's trying to do. They're trying to make you hate yourself or trying to make you love yourself, whereas it's really about everybody else. And so the self-love movement should really be like the everybody else love movement, The better you make everybody else feel, the better you will feel. And I guess making small gestures of light, sort of, and reminding people that it's okay to be naked.
I don't think I've ever met anyone that has not been on board with the self-love movement. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I don't tell people that often.
Well,
because it sounds very anti-feminist, but I love it. I love that it exists. I love that whenever women band together, and I love the acknowledgement that women are really scrutinized. Men are as well, but women a bit more. But I just hate the idea of another individualist movement combating an individualist world. Mm-hmm. That's just what really eats at me. And I think it is a bit of a slacktivist movement. It's an internet movement. It's a Facebook movement. I don't see it in the real world. All the girls that celebrate self-love have never told me I have nice hair or something. No one's ever expressed love towards me. They express love towards themselves. And I also think it becomes a bit of an internet joke, like going to paint my nails, self-love. Mm-hmm. So it puts a lot of attention to an issue that then starts to become diluted because it's living on the internet and not in the real world.
Right.
And so in that sense, I don't discourage it, but I would never say that.
Here is an interesting question then. How am I going to phrase this? How do you feel then about capitalism kind of working its way into these types of movements? So, for example, the self-love movement is very much driven by capitalism, right? It's essentially the way that people are finding out about it and able to jump on the bandwagon is by, hashtagging their photos, is by whatever, signing Dove petitions and right. And you see the campaigns and advertisements getting, well, what they deem diverse range of women to pose in marketing campaigns with, hashtag self-love. Do you see that as harmful, or do you see that as doing something? Because in a way,
I think it does something in the media world. I think it helps a lot of media-related anti-feminist problems. So in that sense, the hashtag is great where it lives and thrives on the internet. But I think it's not doing enough
for the individual
in the real world. We're constantly thinking about how we can represent people on television and stuff, and it's so great and it's so progressive. But when you don't see it in your everyday life, it's kind of weird. It's just splitting the dichotomy. Now there's a whole world that's living in equality on the internet, but we are not.
Right.
And I do think it dilutes it a lot, and it kind of it is focused towards women, and so it's just another one of those bunny quotes that you can't see, but those girly movements or something, where I don't want anyone to think that I need self-love because I'm a woman. So there's another side to it where I don't want anyone to think that I'm weak as a woman, so I need self-love, as opposed to a man who doesn't need it.
Right.
So I feel like it also splits us in that way. And I think that capitalism is really good at what I call an anti-solution, which is doing something grand that acknowledges a problem that exists to appease the masses, but then not do anything about it. So, for example, our tuition is some of the highest in the world, and instead of lowering tuition, we create amazing loan programs. So it's like saying, hey, we know you're struggling, we're going to help you out, but you've really done nothing for us, but everybody's happy. And then our food is terrible, so then we create organic markets or something. So it's showing people that we see the problem, but without doing it. And I think the self-love movement is a little bit like that. It's like saying, hey, we recognize that women are mistreated in the media or have these real unrealistic ideas of how they're supposed to look. Hey, this is the self-love movement. But, I'll still go to the nude beach and it's all men and there's no women out there. Or, I don't feel less catty between other women. Women will never compliment each other. We don't compliment each other enough, or it's just very inward. And I think in a society that's already driven us to be inward, it's detrimental in a very minute way. And I think that's why when I say I'm very afraid to say anything because I am a feminist. I don't not align with any feminism. But I think there's a lot of small battles that I think we don't look at because we've created a hashtag. And so we think we've acknowledged it and had this epiphany, but there's so many layers to peel off. There's so much that's gone into our brain that they've put there for just self-love to be the answer, I hope that came across.
Totally.
A little bit clear.
Is that really interesting? I have my own problems with the self-love movement that are different from those, actually. And I never thought about it in terms of, for example, I guess one of the facets of the self-love movement is no makeup selfie, embrace your no make, which is problematic in its own way because it's, if you want to wear makeup, fine. But it's been this, this natural movement of accepting your face as it is. And what's funny is if you go on Instagram, you will see so many no makeup selfies. But I don't know, I don't have a single, I maybe have a couple, but I don't know a lot of people that are posting those selfies that then will go and be no makeup in society where people can actually see them.
Yeah.
It's still very much inward on your own terms. I'm going to angle it and post it
On
when
my own
I
time,
want to
yeah.
post it on my own social media, and I'm still very much choosing how it goes out into the world, what it looks like. It's still curated in that sense.
And it's curated for a gaze. So
Right.
you're still acknowledging that somebody is looking at you, and you're still wanting acceptance from somebody else, which is why I prefer like body realism, which is like, I don't care what anybody thinks about my body. I don't care what anybody thinks about whether I'm wearing makeup or not. And I think that's where we need to get to, not, hey, look at me, I'm not wearing makeup. Hey, look at me, I'm wearing sweatpants. It's still asking for some kind of validation in whichever way, when it really should be, I really couldn't give a rat's ass what you think about what I look like. And that's the bigger, harder thing to do, especially after, I don't know, personal experiences that you have that are terrible, to really get to that space where you can really not care.
Jumping back to the question, asking if you thought that we could kind of have both, or if they were always going to be mutually exclusive, what realistically in our life, I mean, we're always going to live, Canada anyway, North America is always going to be a capitalist continent for the foreseeable future, in our lifetimes anyway. I will have lived and died in a capitalist society, unless I move, which is unlikely. What then for like individuals who can, realize and see this as a problem? Like, what are some ways, because the information is all put out in front of us, and we're having this conversation in the back of my head. It's very problematic, but then I'm going to wake up tomorrow and be in this world and do it all anyway. So on an individual level, because individual actions matter, I guess, what are ways that we can kind of combat this? How can we live in a capitalist society but move to a place of body liberation and just the essentially desexualization of nudity?
Yeah.
Because having a body, it's not always sexual, and that's as we've discussed, one of the biggest problems.
That's a big question. I think
solve the world's problems here. Come on, Eva.
Then we'll tackle poverty and hunger.
Yes, that's next on the docket.
So I think I had a thought and I lost it. Give me a minute. So what the beginning of your sentence of saying, we know it, but we're just kind of putting it in our back pocket and doing it anyway. I think one of the first things we can do is stop calling the other alternative. Because I find that when a lot of people see like a different style of thinking or dressing or whatever, it's always like, oh, it's different, it's so cool, it's so alternative. It's still the other. So I think constantly acknowledging otherness is something that needs to go. It's not otherness. It's not in relation to something that's normal. I think this is abnormal, So I think starting to not just like things and say, oh, I really like these alternative things, or I really like these different things, but actually voicing them as like yourself and not just engaging with it more, I guess, and thinking about it more and letting your mind trail off. I find a lot of people learn something and think, that's so cool, I've never thought about that, and then they stop there. Instead of maybe picking a book at the library about that and learning about it, and then the girl at the library sees you reading that, and then she asks you to go to this drum circle, and then you end up being friends, not like actually taking a plunge into this information. I think that's another technology problem, because everything is so smart foody, where you think you've got it all in that nut, but
it's bite-sized bits of information.
Exactly, but you need to really try and understand, and you need to travel. I've met so many people who are 30, 40, 50 who have never left Canada and will debate with me about things like this, and I'm always like, you can think I'm wrong and I can think whatever, but you can't talk about it if you've never seen how other people live. There's a million ways to do everything. And unless you see, at the end of the day, Croatia is a coastal place surrounded by some of the best salt water in the world. Of course, there is a bias in the sense of they will have more progressive ideas of nudity and less privacy, we are in a disadvantage because we're mainland. So, why don't you go to these places and then don't stay in a resort and actually see how other people interact? And I guess it's just being open to otherness. And then once you establish that, share that otherness. I think that's really important. A lot of people don't want to, they don't want to be the alternative opinion. And I learned that in journalism school, when the alternative opinion is not cool. It's not going to fly. And I don't know, I think it's just important to keep some sort of agenda or keep some sort of
Wait, they
idea.
taught you in J school that the alternative opinion wasn't good?
No, that's not going to get views. That's not going to get.
That's interesting.
It
I mean, we were in the same program because you went to Ryerson. I don't remember, unless I completely blocked that out of my head.
Well, it was more like if you chose an alternative idea,
it would
succeed. Be like, oh, well, just know that it's not always like that, Eva.
Right.
And you're like, okay, but it is here. So I remember I did a story on UN peacekeepers, raping a lot of people in Sudan on a mission. And I had presented it to the class, which is like one of the weirder stories I understand to choose. But I remember my teacher just being like, not all UN officers are like this. And I just want you to know that. And I said, yeah, that's great, but these are like that. You have to talk about the things that are out there. That I just think now that journalism's turning into like a liking world, it's hard to say something that sucks. You'll get a petition about you to get you off the Globe and Mail board. It's happened a million times,
It's interesting. It all again comes back to capitalism. No, I live here, so I can't hate it entirely. I feed the system. I go to movies like every other day. But it is important, obviously, to acknowledge the pitfalls and the negative kind of things in your own life so that you can hopefully, better them. But it is interesting that you say that it's about, again, that won't succeed, because it brings it back to that capitalist thing of okay, well, we don't want you to cover the story because it's not going to get clicks. It's not going to get views, which is journalism was kind of supposed to be the one thing that was always objective. Do I believe that that's true? No, because I don't believe that objectivity actually exists. Yeah. However, certain things are more objective than others.
Certainly.
Some infinities are bigger than others, is my faults of the stars quote. So, to an extent, yes, but it seems like it's like moving even further away from that post. Especially now that we have
PC culture
and online journalism and clickbait stuff. Again, it's not just picking up and reporting what was on the news, and that's that. It's now constantly all the time. It's these 24-hour news cycles. It's a million different things, little publications that are fighting, using the same material, but fighting for clicks and views. So it's like, how can we spice this up? How can we? So again, you get some of the stuff that maybe needs to get talked about kind of gets left on the back burner because it's not sexy. That
actually makes you think. Yeah. That's why I now only read the Insight section in the Sunday Star, because it's the only thing that I feel I'm going to actually learn something today. Like I'm actually going to read a feature about something I just genuinely don't understand. I think our willingness to learn about things that we actually don't know about is starting to decline, because you're talking to the same people about the same things, reading about the things that you like.
Who all agree with you.
And then you talk to somebody else and you go, wow, she's a hippie. Or, oh, what kind of journalism are you writing? Oh, just about nudity on the islands. And they're like, okay, that's kind of weird. Like, were you on acid then? Ha, ha, ha. So it's like, I just think we're not having engaging enough conversations, whether it's like at a bar, at your dinner table, or with your girlfriend, or wherever. You're not
or
totally
after listening to a podcast.
Or after listening to a podcast. Yeah.
Shameless self-promotion.
Yeah.
No, I think that is all very interesting. And again, back to that knowledge, that's kind of what we're always pushing on this show. Is that knowledge is power. And if don't just read something that you think is interesting and then throw it away. Exactly. Go to the library, read more about it.
Yeah, yell about it on the street. Get people to listen to you.
Expand your worldview. Another interesting thing that I thought about was how you said you really dislike the label of alternative. It's kind of interesting. I mean, we kind of dub ourselves as like an unconventional topics. And again, it's that word. And I disagree in a sense and I agree in a sense, because it made sense to me when you said, again, it facilitates that otherness. And we definitely need to move away from that. I mean, normal is relative. One of my like favorite quotes, actually, which was said by Morticia Addams of the Addams Family, is what is normal for the spider is chaos for the fly. And it's very true, right? So of course it's relative in that sense, but at the same time, can you almost see it useful in a sense? Because by, using, like, how else do you get people, I guess, drive them then to that issue? Because a lot of times, by saying, okay, well, it's unconventional, it's alternative or whatever, that's kind of what like piques people's interest who are on the outside of that. It makes them say, oh,
who
I'm
are
interested.
On the outside, yeah. But I think they're going to come over to us eventually, whereas it's the people that really aren't on that side that we're fighting with. Because the people who already sort of are unconventional, I feel like they'll get with us eventually.
But don't you feel that the people who, by on the other side, I didn't mean the actual like unconventional people, but like the people who go along with the status quo, I feel like when they see something like, oh, this is unconventional, this is alternative, in a sense that it might turn them off, or it might pique their interest and have them say, oh, today I'm going to learn something that I didn't know about. So do you know what I mean? So in that way, I almost can see it as useful.
Yeah.
Or do you feel that it again, completely, it's just always going to create that divide?
I just think that grouping anything in general is grouping thought is unnecessary, in the sense that it might scare somebody away, or it might, that's too alternative for me. I'm not going to get in with those groups of friends who all have crystals hanging around their neck or something. It's almost isolating, like the queer community, let's say, being like the alternative community, but nobody knows what your sexuality is either. I just feel like it sometimes creates a box.
And then we focus on those.
And then we focus on that box, and it's difficult for non-alternative people to penetrate. I don't know. I just like, it's some sort of division, and it almost, you're a freak either way, You're a freak because you only hang out in the finance district, and you're a freak because you're always in Kensington Market. It's like, you want to try and blend the groups. You want the people to hang out together, to engage in conversations together, so that you can understand their side and they can understand yours, and
so that eventually, again, nothing
we can all
is alternative, because it's just, why does it have to be? It's just simply another way of living.
The other side of it is alternative to me. Right. I think it's really creepy that you go to work every day and you don't talk to anybody at your work. I think you're a freak, So it's like, or the way some people dress, or like when I see people dressed in black, I just want to cry for them or something. You got red.
I had to double check. I used to only wear black, so.
But it's the same.
Spicing it up.
Same idea. It's like the two sides of a coin kind of thing. But, I mean, you do, as a publication, you're going to want to be like, hey, we got some alternative stuff here. So you want to bring in that stuff. So obviously it's not like a bad word.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I guess it's almost too, in a way, I guess preparing. I don't know if I like that word, but people for what they're going to get, right? You can't lead people in blind and then just start talking about nudity and drugs and.
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit. It's a lot.
It is a lot. I think we will eventually get there, but I still agree with that. I think it's like kind of baby steps to bridge that gap. But I do hope and see a future where that gap is less wide. And it seems like it's happening bit by bit, maybe, very slowly.
As
but
the
again,
newer generations are a lot more liberal, I think.
And traveling more, which again, you talked about how travel is a big thing. Get out of your bubble, see the world, and don't just see the world at a 5-star resort. see the world from, the comfort of a local's couch. All of that is very important to kind of understanding how other cultures live and work. And understanding your own culture and your own self.
Yeah.
With that, I think that concludes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being a guest. We're going to post a link to the article so that people can read about it. Just off the top of your head, do you have any other resources or anything that maybe any books, any recommendations that maybe people who are interested in this topic or interested in this discussion can follow or can pick up?
Any philosophy that you can possibly read, any existentialism that you can possibly read to connect yourself to this void that everybody talks about on the internet but is extremely real in reality. And just reading more about why anything exists at all, not just you or things, but anything at all, and connecting to nothingness, I think, in a way, to help you tackle the void.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in and chatting with me. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a slice.
That's our show. Thanks for tuning in this week to Fully Exposed. I hope your ass has been sufficiently educated.
This has been an Evoke Media podcast.